We're almost at the LZ, the chopper pilot said to us. Roger that. Captain Reynolds responded and turned to the rest of us. Safety off and get ready to go. All 6 of us readied our weapons and waited for the chopper to land. When it did, we got out to the gray cloudy skies above and a cacophony of military orders being shouted all around us. I observed the gigantic wall which cordoned off the infected city. It stood there insurmountably, not letting anyone in and more importantly, preventing anyone from getting out. Captain Reynolds, follow me. One of the soldiers said, and we went after him to the giant metallic entrance. A high-ranking elderly officer was shouting at a timid soldier in front of the gate. "Colonel, they're here." The soldier who escorted us saluted the colonel, grabbing his attention. He looked like he hadn't slept in days due to the dark bags under his eyes. The officer nodded at the soldier, dismissing him. He gave Reynolds a stern look. "You're here early, were you briefed?" he asked with a scruffy voice. "Just the basics," Reynolds responded calmly. "Our orders are to rescue Dr. Kidman, secure his research and escort him out of the city." The general nodded and took us to a tent, which had a map of the city on the table in the middle. Kidman was last located at the pharmaceutical company here. He pointed to a location on the map. Reports indicate the place was overrun a few days ago when a couple of civilians went inside, but the horde has dispersed since then. You may run into a few stragglers though. If Kidman is dead, secure his research and get out. "What's the report on survivors?" Reynolds inquired. "That's not your concern. Chances are most survivors are already dead and those who aren't are infected with T. Gandhi. If you encounter any survivors and deem them a threat to the mission, use lethal force. If they are not in the vicinity to become a direct threat, ignore them and move on. Rescuing Dr. Kidman and securing his data is the priority." "With all due respect, Colonel, but we don't answer to you," I interjected, somewhat annoyed. "We're not military and the reason we were sent here in the first place was to fix what your guys couldn't." He jerked his head to me but seemed unfazed by my statement. "That's enough, Pierce." The captain shot me a stern glance and then turned back to the colonel. "What kind of behavior do the people infected with T. Gandhi exhibit?" "Ever seen a zombie movie?" the colonel asked, his gaze still fixated on me before looking back at Reynolds. "Rabid behavior," Bracken, the explosives expert, asked. The colonel nodded. "Well, they basically tend to attack violently, regardless of the disadvantage they might be in. They mostly come in groups though, so be careful not to draw too much attention since they can swarm you. Another thing you need to keep in mind is they tend to show intelligent behavior, so they might try to act human sometimes before actually engaging. That's why we can't risk rescuing survivors." He looked back at me. "Understood. Anything else we should know?" Reynolds asked. "That's it. We'll keep in touch via radio. Once you find the dock, radio HQ for evac." "Come on already, we're wasting time, damn it." Daniels, the loudmouth of the team, shouted. "Daylight's burning. Alpha, move out." Reynolds ordered, and the colonel gestured to the gate guards to let us through. One of the 2 soldiers swiped a card on a reader next to the gate, and it started opening slowly as if to give us enough time to change our minds before it was too late. As soon as it opened by a crack, I was able to see a street littered with mutilated dead bodies and blood stains on the ground. "Road ahead's infested with those freaks, so you'll have to go around to reach the dock's location," one of the soldiers said. Reynolds nodded and walked past the threshold. The rest of us followed. As soon as all 6 of us were inside, the gate closed behind us. The noises of the military behind us got muffled, but was still audible, giving a false sense of security. None of us looked back, although I'm sure everyone on the team contemplated whether we had just sealed our own fates. "Weapons ready and keep quiet. That means you, Daniels," Reynolds said. "Whatever," Daniels mumbled under his breath. "The dock shouldn't be far from here. We can take this route," Burton, the team scout, said. As we rounded the corner, all noises from outside the city died down, leaving us with deafening silence. The number of corpses on the streets decreased in comparison to the front of the gate. but it was still a gruesome sight for eyes. "Geez, look at this mess," Daniels said quietly. "This parasite the government's been experimenting on is quite something, huh? Well, let's not stick around to end up like them." I responded, shooting a glance at a young woman who had her entrails hanging out of her belly. "Let's find the doc and get out." "What's so special about this doctor?" Jackson, the team's quietest member, asked. "He's got a cure for all this," Reynolds said. "If we find him, some of these people can still be saved, and in case the infection spreads, he'll be able to stop it." "Wait, you hear that?" Lincoln interrupted, and the whole team stopped. There was a distant high-pitched scream, followed by regurgitating sounds. "Came from over there," Lincoln pointed to the east. "Let's turn here just to be sure." Reynolds pointed to the adjacent street and we followed him. We walked for a few minutes in silence, listening as the screams intermittently permeated the air all around us, always distant but close enough to put us on edge. "Hey, you guys see that?" Daniels looked across the street into an antique shop with a broken glass. There was a little girl standing in the shop, staring at us, motionless. "We gotta help her," he said, striding towards the girl, ignoring the captain's orders to get back. We quickly followed, trying to stop him, but he was already inside the shop, kneeling in front of the little girl. She stared at him with a blank expression, not responding to whatever he was trying to communicate with her. The rest of us pointed our guns at her as a precaution. Whoa, put the guns down." He turned to us, raising his hand. "Daniels, move the fuck away from her," Reynolds ordered. "She's just a little girl, Captain. She's not gonna do us any harm." Before he even finished the sentence, the little girl's blank expression turned into one of pure anger, and she lunged at Daniels, knocking him on his back. There were a few seconds of wrestling, Daniels holding her at bay while she flailed her arms and legs, spitting and screaming. Burton used the butt of his weapon to knock the girl out, instantly muting her screams. "Jesus." Daniels shoved her off himself and stood up, backing away. Burton approached the girl and leaned in to make sure she was unconscious. He then turned back to Daniels and said, "What the fuck were you thinking? This is exactly what HQ told us to avoid, you moron." Everyone stared at Daniels, who held his head down. In retrospect, we should have been a lot more cautious because the next moment, there was a loud thumping sound, and when we all looked at Burton, he had a large glass shard sticking out of his neck. He grabbed at the shard and pulled it out, making blood spurt out of his neck, and then fell down, knocking over the few remaining antiques from the shelves. The little girl stood over his body, staring down at him with bemusement. Reynolds fired a few shots at the girl, instantly making her fall limply, and then he ran to Burton, who was coughing up blood and gasping for air. "Burton, stay with me," he shouted in panic, pressing down on his bleeding neck. After just 1 second, his gloves were soaked in Burton's blood, and the pool that formed around him on the floor kept growing bigger. Burton stopped coughing and went completely still, his eyes still open in shock. The captain stood there motionless for a while and then stood up and strode to Daniels, grabbing him by the collar and pushing him against the wall. The rest of us were about to intervene when the radio crackled to life and a voice resounded on the other end. "Alpha, they're onto you. You have a horde inbound from the north." Just then, the air was filled with the most horrifying, blood-curdling screams I had ever heard before. "Let's move," Reynolds shouted as the sounds of violent screams that were distant just before drew closer by the second. We ran outside, leaving Burton's body behind, and as soon as we set foot on the street again, the screams became even louder and more rabid. A few people sprinted in our direction, flailing their arms aggressively. They had bloodshot eyes and the same look of pure hatred which the little girl had. Some of them had blood on their clothes, and I was certain that it wasn't their own. We fired a few shots and stopped them in their tracks, but just then a big group of them appeared right around the corner. There must have been at least 100 of them, all sprinting at us with such visible hate in their eyes that I knew they couldn't wait to get their hands on us to rip us apart. "Move your fucking asses, Alpha," Reynolds shouted between shots, and we started to retreat down the street. More of the freaks intercepted our path, so we turned left into an alley and ran for it, shooting the occasional zombie that would be in our way. The horde was right at our heels, which I heard from the snarling and shrieking behind. Some of them were shouting something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. "There, go." Bracken pointed to a school at the end of the street and we started sprinting towards it in unison. The doors were open and we jumped inside. I turned around and fired a few shots at the horde, making a few of them tumble down and the ones behind them stumble over the dead ones and lose balance. "Close the door, now," I shouted, while the others shut the door, holding it as firmly as they could with their backs. Daniels tossed a metal pipe to them and they barred the door with it, backing away just in time for the horde behind us to bump into the door, making it rattle violently. For a second I thought it would give way at the hinges, so I held my gun at the ready, as did the others. But after a few failed attempts at breaking in, the violent crashing turned to simple banging on the door, after which that stopped completely as well, and we were left with only the sound of our heavy breathing. We breathed a sigh of relief, but only for a second. The sound of something loud crashing to the ground came from the floor above, followed by a set of frantic footsteps echoing from one end to the other and then stopping entirely. "Alright, here's what we do," Reynolds said, pointing his gun at the ominously dark hallway in front of us. "We go to the back entrance of the school. It'll lead us right where we're supposed to go. From there, it's a straight shot to the dock." We nodded in agreement and started moving through the school very slowly. Since most of the windows were barricaded in a hurry, it was pretty dark even with the light coming in through the cracks, and we had to turn our lights on to navigate the hallway. It quickly became apparent that the school teachers and students tried to hide inside, but didn't make it. The hallway and classrooms had dozens of corpses in them, teenage students and school staff alike, all killed brutally, some massacred, beyond recognition. As we passed by one of the classrooms, we saw through the open door a student inside, sitting at his desk, clutching patches of the hair on his head so tightly it looked like he would rip them off, rocking back and forth, mumbling something. We snuck past him as quietly as we could, keeping an eye on him along the way. "Damn it, hallway's blocked," Reynolds remarked when we reached a bunch of chairs and tables stacked up highly, blocking us from going through. The exit was right there beyond the barricade too, double doors barred with a metal pipe, just like we did at the entrance. "There's a staircase on the other side." Bracken pointed beyond the barricade. "We can probably use the stairs from the second floor to reach the exit." We agreed and turned back to look for the stairs. When we passed by the classroom from earlier, the student was gone. I didn't want to peek inside and risk being seen, so we just decided to use extra caution. After a couple of grueling minutes of walking through the dark, corpse-infested corridors, we reached the stairwell which led to the second floor. Just as we got to the bottom of the stairs, there was a sound of something heavy being dragged across the ground on the floor above, followed by a barely audible grunt. "Eyes open," Reynolds ordered, and took point, climbing the stairs slowly. The second floor was even darker than the first one, with no visible light coming from any cracks between barricaded windows. There were almost no corpses there either, just a few bloodstains here and there, knocked over lockers, etc. I wasn't sure if I should be alarmed or relieved at the lack of dead bodies. As we proceeded, another set of footsteps resounded somewhere in the distance behind us. We quickly turned around, but no one was there. Then another one from the direction we were just facing before. We turned just in time for our beams of flashlights to catch a figure disappear behind the corner. We held our breaths, trying to detect the faintest noise. Reynolds gestured for me to watch the Team 6, so I moved to the back and pointed the gun into the corridor behind us. As we started moving slowly, I walked backwards while keeping an eye on anything that could surprise us. Slowly but steadily, the staircase we had ascended upon was moving further out of my view, and we were close to the other set of stairs which would take us down to the exit. And then I heard a voice in the distance. It sounded like someone pleading or crying. I stopped to focus on it. It wasn't far away, coming maybe from the classroom on the right. Looking back now, I know I should have ignored it, but my conscience couldn't shake the feeling that it might be someone innocent in distress. I slowly inched closer, trying to decipher what the sound was. I opened the classroom door and it became a lot clearer then. It was definitely a female voice pleading, but also faintly banging and scratching on the door at the back of the classroom. I couldn't make out any words aside from, "Please," though. I felt myself moving inevitably towards the noise, each step making the voice clearer. The woman kept repeating phrases like, "Please, I'm locked in here and I need help." As I reached the front of the door, in addition to the meager banging and scratching, I could see the door rattling slightly. I stood there for what felt like an eternity before finally grabbing the doorknob, ever so slowly. As soon as I did, all sounds from the other end stopped, as did the rattling itself. I braced myself to unlock the door and then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around quickly, pointing my gun at Lincoln, who simply shook his head and said, "Don't." I looked back at the door and then nodded to Lincoln. As we started towards the exit, the pleading and banging started again, this time more hysterical than last time. We ignored it and went to catch up with the team. We saw them at the end of the hallway, pointing guns around corner, not moving, and as Lincoln and I turned there, we froze as well. In the hallway in front of the stairs stood dozens of infected people. They all faced in our direction motionless, but had their heads down and eyes closed. It looked like they were sleeping while standing. It was surreal, as if someone had just unplugged their batteries. They didn't even react to the flashlight beams. Reynolds slowly approached the one in front and bent down, cautiously shining the light directly into his face. "Captain, what are you doing?" Bracken asked. "They're unresponsive. I think we can get past them," Reynolds whispered, straightening his back and lowering his gun. "You willing to bet your life on it?" Bracken replied. "Come on, follow me." Reynolds ignored him and squeezed his way between the freaks. The rest of us shot each other a suspicious glance and then followed the captain. We moved slowly between the freaks, doing our best not to touch them, carefully observing each one we passed by. After a minute or so of grueling maneuvering, not knowing if any of them would attack us at any moment, we were in the clear and the staircase was in front of us. "Holy fuck," Lincoln said, coming out last from between them. That was intense. He was barely able to finish that sentence before the next thing that happened. All freaks in the hallway suddenly lifted their heads in unison. "Lincoln, run," I shouted, and we opened fire, but it was too late. Lincoln was swarmed by them and they were biting, scratching, and mauling him. We tried to get them off him, but they were coming at us as well. Lincoln's screams were drowned out by the shrieks of those lunatics pretty soon, and we found ourselves running down the stairs with rabid voices at our heels once again. When we reached the first floor, Bracken removed the pipe from the door and kicked it open, allowing us to get inside the school gym. There was a door at the far end and we ran to it, out footsteps echoing throughout the whole room and the screams following closely behind. "We can't let them follow us," Reynolds shouted and faced the incoming horde. He started to unload into those fuckers and we followed his lead, mowing them down one after another. There were dozens of them, but we managed to put enough distance between ourselves and them to shoot them all down before they got close. Even when only a few of them remained, they ran right at us, never retreating. The gym that was pristine and untarnished when we walked in a minute ago was now littered with countless dead zombies. Reynolds reloaded his gun, visibly tired and furious. Beads of sweat were hanging from his temples, and he stared at the pile of dead bodies in disgust. "Damn it, poor Link." Daniels shook his head. "Let's move on," the captain coldly said and turned to the door. "The dock's closed now." The air outside felt welcoming, despite the smell of rot and death in it. We barred the school door behind us to prevent any stragglers from ambushing us. When we returned to the street, the coast seemed clear. There were dead people everywhere, crash signs, cars, and broken objects, but nothing was moving. "Alpha, give me a sit rep," the radio voice resounded. "HQ, this is Captain Reynolds. We lost 2 men, but we're close to the target location." "Copy that. From what we can tell here, nothing's moving near the pharma company, but you can expect some resistance inside." "Roger that. All right, people, let's move it," Reynolds ordered, stepping up his pace. When we rounded the corner, Reynolds pointed to a big building near the intersection. He said, "That's our target. We need to be quiet, so get your knives out, and in case we're overwhelmed, open fire." The building's entrance was completely obliterated. Glass shards which were once part of the entrance door littered the floor of both the interior and exterior of the company. As soon as we stepped on the glass and made a crunching sound, a very short but violent gasp was heard from the inside. Then, frantic, uneven footsteps that got louder by the second, until one lady showed up in front of us. She had blood around her mouth and bloodshot eyes. She stared at us, snarling and hissing. Her head twitched, and I wondered if the person she was before was still aware of anything, or the parasite took over control completely. Reynolds stepped forward, clutching the handle of his knife firmly. "Come on, gorgeous." He taunted the lady. That was more than enough for her. She screamed and ran to the captain, but he stopped her by grabbing her by the neck. She flailed her arms, trying to reach him, still having a bloodthirsty expression on her face. Reynolds held her like that for a few seconds and then with a swift move stuck the knife into the woman's eye. She immediately went limp and fell to the floor. The rest of us secured all other entrances and waited to see if the woman's screams attracted more of them. No one came, so we were safe for the time being. Reynolds picked up his knife and used the radio. "HQ, we're in. Dr. Kidman and his research should be in the lab on the 4th floor. HQ responded. We proceeded through the ransacked facility. It was surprisingly empty. A few dead scientists here and there, garbage bins and vending machines knocked over, but nothing else in particular. When we finally reached the 4th floor, we followed the signs to the lab section. The laboratory had glass walls, which I assumed were heavy duty and not easily breakable. The inside of the lab itself looked like a mess, with various broken vials and spilled liquids on the floor. From what I could tell, no one was inside. There was a vending machine on the inside, leaning against the door as a barricade. "Anybody see anything?" Reynolds asked. "Nothing," I said. "The doc could have left by now, or died." "Let's check the lab, Daniels." Reynolds gestured to the team member. Daniels slid the door aside with his free hand and carefully pushed the vending machine to stand upwards. "Weapons out," Reynolds commanded, sheathing his knife. We did so and went inside, scanning the room. "Dr. Kidman," Reynolds called out with his gun raised. "We're here to rescue you. Are you here?" A few seconds of pause ensued, then, out of a corner, a person in a lab coat jumped out, rushing with scissors in hands at Reynolds, who was turned away. Just as he was about to stab the captain, I opened fire on the attacker, knocking him backwards on the floor. "Hold your fire," Reynolds shouted. He looked at the attacker, who was holding his bleeding wound, writhing on the floor. "God damn it, Pierce, we needed him alive." Reynolds got in my face. "Nice seeing you again, Captain." The attacker spoke in pain, scooting away and leaning against the nearby wall. "The government sent you to salvage what they fucked up." "Captain, you know him?" I asked. Reynolds turned to the doc. "Kidman, I was hoping you'd be more reasonable," he said. "Give us what we came for and we'll provide you with first aid." The doctor chuckled, but his expression quickly turned into agony. He said, "You know as well as me I'm a dead man, and there's no way I'll cooperate with those fuckers. I won't let them have the sample, or my research." "Captain, what's he talking about?" Bracken asked. The captain didn't respond. To this, the doctor let out a short laughter and said, "Oh, you poor bastards, they didn't even tell you." "Tell us what?" I asked impatiently. "You're not here to rescue me or to find a cure." He responded, "Your real objective was to secure a sample of T. Gandhi and steal my research so that the government can continue to weaponize the parasite." "Shut up," Reynolds yelled at Kidman. The doctor continued, "But you're too late. I already destroyed everything. Research, samples, all gone." "You destroyed them." Reynolds was furious. The doc chuckled painfully again. "Look around you. This is the future that the government wants for the entire nation. They're not interested in a cure. And why would they be? The whole purpose of the parasite is to control the people. It's too valuable for them to just let it go." "Is this true, Captain?" I asked. Reynolds kept quiet, to which the doctor laughed again. He started wheezing loudly. "Just like me, you were used," he said before closing his eyes and sliding sideways on the wall, going completely limp. "Captain," I called out again. "We have our orders." Reynolds responded, "What the government does with this is for the greater good of the nation." "Greater good? Have you not seen the thousands of innocent dead people by now? Women, children? How is this for the greater good, Captain?" I won't argue with you, Pierce. You can follow your orders or you can die here. Your choice. By this moment, white-hot rage was boiling inside me, and I simply pointed my gun at the captain, which he did right back at me. I can't allow you to do this, Captain, I said, my hands shaking. I'm warning you, Pierce, stand down, he said, looking impatient, but in control of emotions. We had a stare-off for what felt like hours. I expected the captain to simply shoot me, since to him the mission always came first. I had completely even forgotten about my teammates, and then another gun was pointed to the side of Reynolds' head. Drop the weapon, Captain, Bracken said. Daniels went to the other side and pointed his own weapon. Reynolds eyed each of us as if he was weighing his options. Don't do this, Captain, I said when I saw the indecisiveness in his eyes. He stared at me, his weapon gripped harder than before, veins bulging on his temple, and then he just lowered the gun, allowing Bracken to confiscate his gun. Just then, the radio crackled to life. Alpha, what's going on over there? Reynolds stared at me coldly and said, if we don't secure the sample, there's no evac. Let's find a sample and go home. Alpha, respond, HQ said again. I ripped the radio away from Reynolds and threw it on the ground, stomping on it. You stupid motherfucker, Reynolds shook his head. Face the wall over there. I gestured with my gun. Are you joking? Face the fucking wall, I shouted. Reynolds obeyed, placing his hands on the opposite wall. Daniels, cuff him, I said. Daniels cuffed Reynolds to the radiator and stepped back. You're making a big mistake. The captain jerked his cuffed hand effortlessly, making a clanking metallic sound. There's no way out of the city, you dumb fucks. When we're out, we'll radio HQ to rescue you, I said. We'll leave you with enough food and water until then. We dragged the vending machine close enough to him so that he can reach it with his free hand. The remaining three of us turned around, ready to leave. Don't leave me here, you sons of bitches. Reynolds scoffed. I'll find you and I'll kill you all. You hear me? I'll kill you. We ignored him and waltzed out of the building while his cursing and yelling followed behind. When we were finally out, rain had started. So what the fuck do we do now? Bracken asked, stepping into the rain and turning to us. There's gotta be a way out somewhere, a place they're not observing, I responded, not believing my own words. Just then, a voice came over the radio, but it wasn't HQ. This is Adrian Taylor's. I'm in the clock tower and I have survivors with me. We'll be leaving the city in 4 hours. If anyone's alive out there, get to the tower as soon as possible. Repeat. We'll be leaving in a few hours. After that, you're on your own. We listened to the voice over the radio carefully, hanging on every word. Well, goddamn, this couldn't have come at a better fucking time. Daniels grinned. Hold on, this could be a trap. Bracken shook his head. Well, trap or not, we really have no choice right now, I told them and leaned into my radio. Adrian, do you copy? No response. Adrian, do you copy? I repeated. Maybe it's a one-way radio. Daniels shrugged. Well, either way, let's go and check it out. I said, it's either that or we die in the city. HQ won't help us. The drizzle outside quickly turned into a downpour, which worked to our advantage since we could move faster without alerting the infected to our presence. The clock tower was on the other side of town, so we had a long way to go. Night fell soon and the rain showed no signs of subsiding, but we pushed on. There were a few stragglers here and there, but they were either wandering the streets aimlessly or just standing and twitching. We were able to get past them without being noticed. So the only problem we encountered up until then was when we reached the main street leading to the clock tower. We were on an elevation above the street and were able to overlook our path to the tower. The clock tower rose high from the distance. Its giant handles stopped on 9 hours and 25 minutes. The road between us and the tower was littered with hundreds of zombies just standing there with no particular reason. The radio resounded again. This is Adrian. We're at the clock tower and we'll be leaving in 3 hours. If anyone's alive out there, try to make it here before then. After that, you're on your own. Adrian, do you copy? I tried again, but no response. We need to go around these guys. Daniels said, what's the best route to take? Let's slide down this hill and then we can take a detour. Bracken responded. I observed the slope in front of us. It looked a little risky, but doable. The bottom had a muddy pond, so the landing looked safe. I nodded. Without any hesitation, Bracken stood up and approached the muddy slope. With careful footing, he started to slide down. Daniels and I watched as Bracken balanced himself perfectly all the way down until reaching the bottom, falling waist deep into the pond of mud. He then gestured for us to follow. "You go first," I told Daniels, and he slid down a little less graciously than Bracken, but still reached the bottom safely. It was then my turn. I took position on the slippery slope and slid down, gaining speed as I went further down. Then I fell into the muddy pond, managing not to dive under. "Alright, let's," I started and then stopped. I felt something grip my boot in the pond, and before I even had a chance to shake it off, a figure jumped out of the mud and tackled me, causing the both of us to fall into the mud. Before we dove under, I saw a hairless face with an open mouth and bloodshot eyes trying to produce a dry screech. I felt the dirty water filling my mouth and bony fingers being wrapped around my throat. And then just as quickly as the fingers grabbed me, they went loose and I jolted up, spitting mud. I wiped my eyes just in time to see Bracken pulling his knife out of the skull of the assailant. "Move, Pierce." He yanked me up, wiping the mud off his own face. Daniels was already across the street behind a house, out of sight of the horde and waving for us to get our asses there right away. We looked at the horde and saw one zombie staring suspiciously in our direction, so we bolted out of the mud and joined Daniels. The zombie approached the pond of mud we were in just before, sniffed, hissed, looked around and then turned and left. I spit the remaining mud which was in my mouth and cursed. "That was too damn close," Bracken scoffed. We took a detour, which was relatively safe, save from a handful of freaks here and there which we managed to sneak past. In about 20 minutes or so, we had finally emerged from an alleyway and reached the clock tower. There was a massive wooden door at the bottom, with a couple of zombies walking around. The three of us split up and took care of the zombies with knives before they could hear or see us. I knocked on the door loudly. No response. I knocked again. "Hey, we heard your broadcast," Daniels shouted. "We're just looking for a way out." We waited some more, with only the sound of rain accompanying us, and then the sound of the door unlocking came from the other side. The door opened a crack and a teenager stood there, timidly observing us behind the door. "Hey," I said softly, "we're not gonna hurt you. We heard your broadcast. We're looking for a way out." He didn't respond, but instead looked at my teammates. "We're not government," I said, suddenly realizing armed soldiers didn't really make a good first impression. The boy hesitated for a few seconds before swinging the door wide open and motioning for us with his head to come inside. All right, get on." He shut the door, muffling the rain outside. The place inside was ransacked and the salvaged items were used for a barricade on the windows. Inside were two more teenagers, boy and girl. "I'm Adrian." The boy who let us in introduced himself. "This is Clara and Tom. Hey, can you put those guns down? You're making me real nervous." "Adrian, we heard you over the radio. You said that you were leaving the city. You know the borders are guarded, right?" Bracken said. "We do." Clara nodded. "Adrian has a friend who's gonna pick us up with a chopper." "Chopper?" Daniels frowned. "That's a rich friend you got there." "Guess you could say that." Adrian said, "We need to be on the rooftop of a nearby building soon. Having connections is pretty useful, huh? The city's surrounded by military. The chopper won't be able to enter the city, not to mention getting out." I shook my head. "My guy is the military. Relax, all's good. We'll be out of here in no time." Adrian smiled. I sighed, suspicious of the whole situation. How is it that a guy who's no older than 18 had connections with someone who pilots a chopper in the army and is able to get them out of a quarantine zone? But I decided to go along, since we had no other choice right now. "So how long until your guy gets here?" Bracken sat on a nearby bench. "He'll radio us when he's close. Shouldn't be long now," Adrian responded. We spent the next couple of hours waiting, talking to each other and trying to make the time go by faster. I contemplated everything we had been through so far and wondered what Captain Reynolds was doing at this moment and if he was still handcuffed in the pharma company. And then suddenly a voice came over the radio, jolting me back to reality. "Adrian, you there?" The voice said. Adrian rushed to the radio and picked it up. "Yeah, still here. You coming?" "Yeah, be there in a few. Get to the landing zone." "Let's go." I stood up and went to the door. "You guys stay behind us," Daniels said to the teens. I opened the door and we went out. The rain almost completely stopped. "Over there." Tom pointed to a building across the street. We climbed the fire escape and made it to the rooftop, and soon we heard the whirring of a helicopter in the distance. In a matter of minutes, the bird was above us, and it slowly landed on the building, making all papers and other trash on the roof scatter. The pilot turned off the engine and the chopper doors opened. Then, all of a sudden, a group of soldiers emerged, pointing their guns at us. "Drop your weapons on the ground, now." They shouted commands at us, and before we could explain anything, we were forced on our knees and our guns confiscated. "So you actually got him, Adrian. Nice work." One of the soldiers chuckled and I was confused. "Hey, what's going on, Adrian?" I asked, but the soldier shut me up. Just then, another soldier stepped out of the chopper, stretching his back and cracking his neck. It was Captain Reynolds. "Captain," Daniels tried to stand up, but was knocked back down by a soldier. "Surprise, assholes," he said, focusing on me. "Told you I'd find you." Adrian interjected. "Listen, this little family reunion is nice, but let's talk business. We upheld our end of the deal. Now it's your turn. Pay up." Yeah, sure. Men, give them their reward." Reynolds responded. The soldiers raised their guns and opened fire. There was a loud scream and a "please God no" before it was silenced forever. "Fucking brats." Reynolds shook his head and continued. "Thought you'd just leave me behind and abandon the mission, huh? Well, no matter, we managed to secure one sample the doc didn't destroy, so the mission is accomplished. But we can't just let you go home, no, not after what you pulled at the pharma company. So now, let's see which one of you pricks will be lucky. If it were up to me, I'd kill you all right here, but HQ has other plans." He pulled out a device that looked like a scanner and pointed it at me, pressing a button on it. It started producing a synchronized beeping sound. "This device will tell us if any of you are infected." He held the device trained on me for what seemed like forever, and my heart felt like it would jump out of my chest in anticipation of what was going to happen. And then the scanner started to beep violently and a red light on the front started glowing. Reynolds lowered it and smiled. "Well then," he said, "looks like we got ourselves an infected one." I stared at the captain in disbelief. "I'm infected. How? How did I contract the parasite?" "No, that can't be right." I shook my head. "I'm not infected." "Well, let's check it again then." Reynolds pointed the scanning device at me again and pressed the button. The beeping started, and after just a few seconds, the red light turned on and the beeping became even more violent. "Nope, still infected." Reynolds shrugged. He approached Bracken and scanned him. Just like with me, the device turned red. "Shit," Bracken cursed. Reynolds approached Daniels and scanned him as well. After a few seconds of beeping, the light turned green and the beeping stopped. "Well, lucky you, Daniels." Reynolds said, "You never did like to get your hands dirty, did you?" Daniels sighed in relief and then glanced at us with a look of guilt on his face. Before I could fully comprehend what he was thinking, Reynolds pulled his gun out and blew Daniels' brains out. No, Bracken tried to stand up, but was knocked down and beaten by the soldiers. Reynolds knelt down in front of me. "You guys are the lucky ones. You get to go home alive." He stood up and gave a command to one of the soldiers, entering the helicopter. One of the armed men approached me and swung his gun. Everything went black after that. After God knows how long, I woke up in a brightly lit room. I adjusted to the light and observed my surroundings. I was in white clothes that resembled that of hospital patient's gown and was located in a tiny room with a bed, sink, and toilet inside. In front of me was a huge pane of glass with a door in the center, and on the other side, pristine white walls and a perfectly clean ceiling and floor. An exit door was on the other side, as white as the walls, barely distinguishable from the walls. The glass was blocking me from exiting, and I started to understand in my half-conscious mind that I was a prisoner here. "Hey, hey," I shouted and then started to ram the glass door with my shoulder. After about 10 rams, I saw that there wasn't a single mark there, and my shoulder was throbbing. I shouted some more, knocking on the glass, but there was no response from anyone. I sat down, defeated, and thought about everything. The last thing I remembered was me being scanned for infection, Daniels being killed by the captain, and me getting knocked out. How the hell did I get infected? Was it the muddy water? I wondered where Bracken was. I looked around and saw a surveillance camera in the upper corner of the room, so I started to shout at it. "Hey, I know you can see me. Tell me what the fuck is going on here." I wanted to reach for the camera to rip it off, but it was way beyond reach. I cursed, pacing around the room for what felt like hours, until I just gave up and lay on the bed, falling asleep. I woke up to the sound of door slamming shut. I raised my head and saw Reynolds with 2 armed men in the room outside, striding towards me. "Rise and shine, pretty boy," Reynolds shouted, and I approached the glass door. "Reynolds, what are you doing?" I asked, furious and desperate. "You're infected, therefore you're valuable to the government. You're going to stay here and be used as a test subject so the researchers can continue to improve the parasite." "What?" "Who knows? One day when the parasite is under control, you might even walk free, but only if we're certain you'll be obedient. This is a very noble cause you're volunteering for, Pierce. The parasite takes over sooner. Your experiments won't give results if the parasite has already killed the host." "You're right, and that's why one of the scientists in the facility has concocted an antidote or whatever which freezes the parasite for a long time." He smiled maliciously. "Where's Bracken?" I asked. "Oh, don't worry about him." Reynolds dismissed my question. "You just do what we say and you won't get into trouble." He placed his keycard on the door and it opened. "Turn around and put your hands behind your head," one of the soldiers ordered, and I obeyed. They handcuffed me and dragged me to a laboratory where I was placed in a chair while the doctor gave me a shot. A soldier stood in the room the whole time, observing me. "This will freeze the parasite," he said, "for at least 1 month. After that we'll give you another one, but if you start to notice any changes, let me know." He turned around and asked the soldier to help him with something at the shelf with vials. The soldier approached the dock and they were turned away from me. I looked around to see if there was anything that could help me escape. There was a scalpel right next to me. All I need to do is grab it and stab the soldier before he turns around. I glanced at the soldier and then at the scalpel again. It was now or never. I braced myself to get up and grab the weapon, and just as I was about to do that, another soldier walked in through the front door. "Doc, HQ wants a report on the blood tests," he said, glancing at me and then back at the doc. "Yes, right away," the doctor responded. "Please escort the subject back to his confinement." The moment was over and I was too late. I was taken back to my cell, being mocked by the soldiers along the way for being in the predicament that I was in. From there, being tested was a regular occurrence on a daily basis. It must have been about a week of living in that cell when one day no one simply came to bring me food or take me to the lab. I thought it might have been a day off or something, so I simply continued sleeping. But then, a few hours later, a power outage occurred, enveloping the room in complete darkness. I heard gunshots and screams echoing in the distance and instantly stood up, squinting in the dark and trying to make out what the sounds were. "Emergency power restored." A voice echoed throughout the facility and red lights turned on in the room, giving me some form of visibility. Then, the glass door in front of me suddenly opened and I stared at it in disbelief. I was free. Just then, the entrance door swung open and a soldier barged in with his gun trained on me and his flashlight blinding me. "Freeze," he yelled. "Don't shoot." I raised my hands. The beam of light searched my face, forcing me to close my eyes. The soldier then lowered his gun, allowing me to see his face illuminated by the emergency light. "Come on, Pierce, we're getting the fuck out of there," Bracken said. "Bracken, you made it." I could hardly contain my smile. "There's no time for bromance, damn it. We gotta move. The facility's been compromised. There's an outbreak." He handed me a handgun and led me through the door. "Listen," he said, "zombies or not, you can't hesitate. If they catch us, they'll put us back in the cell and continue their research. So how do we get out? I have no idea where the fuck we are." I shrugged. "We're in one of their underground research facilities. We're on floor B21. We can take the elevator out, but what? We can't let this thing spread. We can't let the government kickstart this program again either. So how do we stop them?" Bracken pulled out a C4 explosive and said, "The main generator is on floor B31. If we blow it up, it will initiate a chain reaction and this whole facility will go to hell." "Wait a second. Soldiers are probably everywhere. We'll never make it." "Soldiers are busy trying to contain the outbreak. There's only gonna be a few of them down there. Come on, let's go." Before I could say anything, he turned around and proceeded down the hallway, forcing me to follow him. "Hold on." He stopped me when we reached the corner. I heard voices, and when I peeked, I saw soldiers frantically yelling orders and pointing their guns at something. They started shooting, and screams suddenly filled the air, echoing throughout the facility. In seconds, the soldiers were overwhelmed by those rabid freaks. "Now's our chance, let's move," Bracken ordered, and I followed him. "The elevator on this floor has guards in front, so we gotta use the stairs," he said, jumping over a dead scientist. I saw through the glass military and research personnel being attacked in the lab next to the corridor, but we used that diversion to move along without attracting anyone. Soon we got to a fire escape and entered a flight of stairs leading both up and down. When I looked down, I couldn't see the bottom due to the dark and the fact that the stairs stretched far down. As we descended down the stairs, I suddenly felt dizzy and my legs becoming heavy, as if they were made of lead. My stomach burned like someone stuck a fire poker here. "No time, Pierce, move it." Bracken helped me up, his boots echoing throughout the room. "The parasite," I muttered. "I think it's starting to get to me. I thought the scientists froze it." Bracken shook his head. "No, they sped it up. The parasite can remain dormant for years inside the host. They wanted to speed it up." I felt my heart sinking, and with it, all my hopes. "There's no cure, Pierce. There's no way out for us, but we can give the people another chance. We have to do this. Got it? Do you got it?" He shook me by the shoulder. I gave him a weak yeah, and he urged me to get back on my feet and continue. I couldn't despair now. We had a mission to complete. My strength returned and the pain in my stomach subsided, so we continued. About halfway through, I asked, "How the fuck did you get out and get that gear?" "There was a subject who got taken over by the parasite," he responded while continuing down the stairs. "He attacked one of the guards and I took down the other one and then killed the infected. I took the guard's weapon and uniform. I fucking hate those patient clothes they gave us." I chuckled. Even here at the end of the world, he was nonchalant about everything. Just as we reached floor B27, the door swung open and 3 soldiers barged in. They spotted us, but before they had time to react, Bracken and I shot all of them. As they fell dead, the unmistakable screams of the infected resounded throughout the facility, too close for comfort. I grabbed one of the dead soldiers' assault rifles and continued to run down the stairs with Bracken. I turned around to see how far behind he was, seeing he was only a few feet away. Another door burst open and a zombie ran in between Bracken and I, sprinting at my teammate. Bracken shot him, and then 3 more ran in, practically sliding into the room. We eliminated them as well. Bracken rammed the door before the others could join, and held it with his back as it rattled violently. "Go, I'll hold them," Bracken shouted, throwing me the C4. "Set the charges." I picked it up, and when he saw my hesitation, he yelled for me to go once again, and I listened, telling him to hold on. I descended as fast as I could, hearing screams and gunshots on the upper levels. When I finally reached B31, I opened the door and ran towards the main generator room. 2 soldiers pointed their guns at me, commanding me to freeze, but I shot one and ran for cover. The other one opened fire, but missed. I shot from around the corner and managed to hit him in the shoulder, knocking him down. I ran to him quickly, kicking his gun away from him, and shot him in the face as he begged for his life. The main generator room was much larger than I expected, and the generator itself occupied most of the space. I secured the area and pulled out the C4. I set the timer to 10 minutes and placed it on the generator from a side where it wasn't so visible. I then ran outside the room and sprinted across the corridor towards the elevator. Before I could reach it though, someone jumped on me from behind the corner, tackling me to the ground and making me drop my gun. "Not so fast, Pierce," Reynolds shouted, pointing his gun at me. I kicked his shin, knocking him down, and jumped on top of him. As we wrestled on the ground, I punched him, but he managed to knock me off of him. I got up just in time to see him swing his knife at me. I dodged and used the momentum to slam his head onto the wall. I grabbed his hand and slammed it against the wall over and over until he dropped the knife. As we struggled like that, he managed to wriggle out of my grasp and charge at me, knocking me on my back. He was on top of me now and started punching me violently. "You're not gonna stop this, Pierce," he shouted, swinging violently as my face exploded with pain from each punch. He then put his hands around my throat and squeezed. I looked to my left with my darkened vision and saw the knife on the floor. With all my remaining strength, I reached for the knife with the tips of my fingers and swung with all my might. I felt it connect to something, and Captain's weight was off me. Reynolds pulled the knife out of his shoulder and looked at me with pure anger in his eyes. I turned onto my stomach ready to crawl away, my vision blurry and my breathing painful. In front of me on the floor was the gun I dropped when Reynolds tackled me. I crawled towards it, hearing Reynolds' cry while he charged me again. I grabbed the gun and turned around. Reynolds was running towards me with the knife raised, and I pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. I did it again and again, with him drawing ever closer. Just as he was about to bring down the knife on me, 3 loud bangs resounded in the hallway. Reynolds staggered, and his look of anger changed to one of surprise as he dropped the knife and fell to his knees, coughing up blood. I looked to where the shots came from in time to see Bracken limping towards me. "Well done, boys." Reynolds chuckled painfully and looked up at me as I stood up. "You did it, but you're already dead men. You know that, right?" He fell on his side, clutching the part of chest where Bracken shot him. "Either way this ends, we stop this thing from spreading. That's all that matters, Captain. I hope getting killed over nothing was worth it." I stepped around him and called the elevator. "You didn't stop shit." I turned around to face him. He continued, "This thing will spread, millions will die, and it'll be all your fault." I felt more anger boiling up in me, but I controlled myself. Bracken, however, pointed his gun at Reynolds, completely red in the face. Just then, more screams of those zombies resounded throughout the facility, drawing closer by the second. The elevator door opened. "Bracken, leave him. He's dead either way," I said. "He killed Daniels," Bracken said. "And I'd do it again." Reynolds laughed. I gotta just say, blowing his brains out like that and silencing his loud mouth forever. Priceless. Bracken seemed even angrier, veins throbbing on his forehead. "Bracken, don't do it. It's what he wants," I implored. The air was filled with those screams which got louder and louder. My only regret was not being able to kill each one of you that way. Reynolds continued. "But that's why I brought you here, so you can continue to serve as playthings for the government until the parasite is ready, and then it can be released again, and you, Bracken, would be the national hero who caused all that." He laughed again. Bracken looked like he was going to explode. "Do it," Reynolds shouted, while I screamed the opposite. The screams were very close now, and then Bracken just lowered his gun. "You're going to die a slow death down here. I'm going to let those freaks tear you piece by piece," Bracken said and entered the elevator. "Goodbye, Captain," I said and pushed the ground floor button. Dozens of zombies were coming down the hallway in our direction now. The captain reached out to us with his free hand and said, "Pierce, don't leave me like this. Don't let them get me. Finish me off." I watched as the creatures started tearing Reynolds apart and his screams mixing in with that of the zombies before the elevator door closed. Bracken and I were quiet for the duration of the ride, listening to the echoing cacophony of screams, shots, and moaning. We hoped the elevator would not stop anywhere along the way, and luckily it didn't. When the door finally opened, we sprinted out and through the empty lobby into the dark woods. I helped carry Bracken due to his leg injury, and we ran for what felt like hours even though in reality it was just minutes. We stopped to catch our breaths, looking around for any potential dangers. Just then, the ground beneath us started shaking slightly, and soon after we heard a very faint explosion in the direction of the facility. "We did it, Bracken." I gave him a pat on the shoulder, exhausted more than I've ever been in my life. "Now let's get out of here before backup arrives." He nodded. "We managed to escape there and are currently in hiding. I can feel myself changing gradually day by day and I'm losing control of my body, so I know I don't have much time left. I'll have to end it myself before I'm completely lost to the parasite. I'm okay with that, since we managed to stop the government's experiment from spreading again. At least, that's what I thought. There are more and more reports coming in on the news of people committing acts of violent attacks on other citizens all over the country. There seems to be no connection between any of the attacks, except for one tiny details that they all share in common. The attackers all have bloodshot eyes.